Well, hello everyone. Here we go, starting up some lectures online. And so obviously our next chapter is to be the human development chapter. It's the chapter we're coming back to since it's chapter 3 on this one. In the future, it may not be numbered chapter 3, but nevertheless, it's the material on human development. And I want to cover some of the basics here. What is human development and some of the most basic elements of the issues at hand. And then maybe we'll even start off getting into some of the biology. So here we go. In terms of human development, I tell people a lot of times encompasses 3 areas. That is what we cover in human development, is 3 particular facets. The first of which is physical development, also known as biological development. And you need to make note of that. When we speak of physical development, if we're going to start studying physical development, really the time to start focusing on it, and we'll do that in this lecture, is at the point of conception. Some people are a little surprised by that. They think you should start about studying physical development about time they turn 5, or maybe when they turn 1, or when they're born. But even earlier in that, we're going to cover physical development from the point of conception, really through old age. All right. The second category that we're covering is cognitive development. And cognition means mind. And so when we talk about cognitive development, in the past we talked about it in a prior chapter from a quantitative standpoint when we looked at IQs, IQs of 130, 100, 130, 70, and things like that. We looked at it from a number standpoint. In this chapter, we're going to look at it more from a qualitative standpoint, and we'll get into that a little bit more later. And then finally, we're going to talk about social development. Social development in this chapter talks about personality development primarily, and what we basically do in terms of how our personality develops based on the people around us. You know, do we grow up in a home that is, we have 7 brothers and sisters? Do we grow up an only child? Do we grow up in a major city? Do we grow up in a rural countryside? You know, these are all factors. You know, do we have a loving family? Do we not have a loving family? All those things are factors that can come into play here. So these are the 3 categories in this chapter that we're going to focus on. Now, before we get into this, the 3 areas, the first thing I want to do is talk about one of the longest standing debates out there, and that is what influences human development. There's been a lot of movies and a lot of shows. This is something of a dated movie. It's called Trading Places. And it was starring Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. But it was a great example of this, what influences human development, because basically you had Dan Aykroyd on the left was a rich millionaire, and Eddie Murphy on the right was sort of the guy from the streets. And the movie starts off with 2 other people, not these 2 other older gentlemen talking about what does it take to be a millionaire. What does it take? Do you need to be born that way? That's what one argues. And the other says, no, you can learn it. And that's one of the big debates they have. And in this movie, these 2 old gentlemen decide, you know, to test this. Can you be born to be a millionaire, or do you have to learn to be a Wall Street wizard, you know, that kind of stuff, and do well on Wall Street? So they make a bet that, you know, one guy says, I can train someone to do this. And this gets us into a discussion of what is really called the nature-nurture controversy. There's been a lot, and the premise behind the movie is, you know, is being good at something biological, or is it environmental and it's learned? Well, that's what nature and nurture is all about. If you believe in nature, if you believe that most of our development is influenced by nature, you are leaning on the biology, the genetics. And there's a lot of truth to that. Your gender is determined by genetics. Your eye color, your natural hair color, your height, your build are determined by genetics. They're determined by nature. So there's a lot of evidence to back that up. Nurture says that a lot of who you are is determined by the environment, your upbringing. Okay, and there's evidence to back that up too. Are you raised in a loving home where education is strongly endorsed, or do you grow up in a neglectful home where education is hardly mentioned? You know, so there's evidence for both sides, and a lot of people will say, okay, can it be both? I mean, it's not all nature or all nurture. Can it be both? And the answer is yes. Yes, it can be both, and it is both. The true argument lies at how much of each is in play. There is actually a field out there called behavioral genetics. And behavioral genetics seeks to basically figure out, this particular question, okay? What influences human development the most? And who they usually look at when they do behavioral genetic studies, researchers and doctors and things like that, they look at twins, identical twins. Identical twins are the best subjects because they both have the same gene code, all right? They come from the same DNA. And then sometimes if you have identical twins separated at birth, that's the absolute best study. Because identical twins separated at birth, you can watch and see how they grow up and how they change and what works and what doesn't and so on. So this is some of the major stuff. This is just the beginning of what we're doing here. And so this is what I wanted to start off talking about, was the three categories that we get into and the debate behind the theory. As always, these videos, I try to keep them about 5 to 15 minutes. And so this is a good starter for this chapter. Hope all is going well. Talk to you soon.